opportunity to talk about so many themes in one setting. I do just want to clarify, I wasn't a co-founder of Dublin Pride, because somebody would go round tonight going, she said she was that. So, I am indeed a founder member to North West Pride. So, I'm aware of the time, I was going to give you the words, which is going to kind of race through it, right? You have that little introduction about yourself. One of the reasons I'm so very keen to talk about rural exclusion is because in my life, in my personal experience as well as my work experience, I've been very involved in the exclusions that take place in community settings. So I grew up in Liverpool in the inglorious days of Margaret Thatcher's reign. I have a working knowledge of poverty, which is coming in very handy at the moment. But from moving from there and to other urban dwelling to then moving to very rural County Leitrim has given me, I think, a good insight in how exclusions work and what the differences and commonalities are in that. I call this outsiders. There is a great degree, I find, in this country to which the urban and rural divide is maintained. I'm kind of charmed that we're by the city walls, do you know what I mean? Like I'm inside the city walls for a minute. So out there, beyond the pale, which I hesitate to say because I'm English, let's just take a look. So, what's rural exclusion? I'm not treating you like fools, you all have a sense of what rural exclusion is, but these are some of the kind of most direct elements of it that I'd like to address. Isolation, that sounds very obvious. Geographical isolation is a huge thing in areas that have very low populations. So people I would consider my neighbours, my good friend neighbours, maybe as much as 30, 40, 50 miles away from me. The social isolation, let's look at counties that have no specific LGBT settings and they very, very likely have no even kind of, as you might say, gay-friendly, which is another phrase I don't like, but there aren't the social events, there aren't the social interactions. People are isolated both within their homes and geographically within their locations. The lack of support that there is around that in terms of social support obviously has an impact on people's health, both physical and mental, and the lack of service provision. Now get me right, rural Ireland. You know, I'm speaking very much about the Northwest, that's where I live. These are truths for other rural areas as well. I'm not separating the Northwest in that. But broadly speaking, in this country, the provision of services for anyone in rural areas is really, really bad, right? So in terms of healthcare, first of all, you have to find the healthcare provider. Then you have to find the healthcare provider who is either LGBT friendly or has some sense of what LGBT is. The poor resources of those regions, I was very interested. Anna this morning talked about transport and how limiting it is on people's lives when they're not able to access transport. In the rural areas of the Northwest, there is no public transport. You can get a bus to Dublin, you can get a train to Dublin. If you want to go to Galway, you've got to come to Dublin first. You know? Rural transport schemes, which were funded by the government, have been completely eroded and basically serve a very small demographic and are basically used, thankfully, to get older people to specific hospital appointments. And I'm very glad for them that that's happening, but that's kind of all it is. The poor internet access is something that actually has a huge impact both on people's access to social and interaction, but also their access to employment. That is something, you know, there were rural broadband schemes, but they've been put into place. I still can't get a signal what with the mountain behind me. And that's great. Like, I'm someone who has, obviously, I have access to my peers, to social interaction. I'm very fortunate in that. But for those people who are trying to get involved in something, that is a huge limitation. The low visibility that there is impacted by the fact that, you know, there are low populations, there aren't centres of population, it's hard to find somewhere to put your poster up. Poor access to services, reduced communication and interaction with LGBT initiatives. Like, you know, I would suggest that most of the people in this room are from an urban setting, and those of you that aren't, well, hey, well done. But I think most events that take place, it's very difficult for rural people to get to them, right? And there are much greater expenses involved. Like if you're coming from Donegal to Dublin, you really do need to stay overnight, particularly if you're driving. The reduction of support by agencies, I mean, that's happening to everybody across the board, but it is impacting on LGBT people very much. It manifests itself, sorry, I look speed read. It manifests itself, you know, Davin spoke about, you know, there isn't statistical evidence of lower income, but I think experientially I would suggest that a lot of LGBT people do have a lower income. Migration is a huge issue in rural Ireland. In our current times, where we have a government that has actively encouraged young people to emigrate and to leave the country, in rural areas for LGBT people, what happens is that people are still migrating, not because they feel you have to go to the city to be a queer, but because there is nothing there for them. So what that results in, particularly in terms of activism work in those regions, is you have a demographic of younger people, who will maybe go into college or who are in college, and then they go to get some work, and then they come back years later to look after their elderly parents. Now that's a little bit of a generalisation, but there are a huge number of people I know for whom that is the case. They've returned, they left to America, to the UK, wherever. They've returned to look after their elderly parents, and they are returning to a life of secrecy, or certainly of social isolation. Volunteer burnout, again, you've got a low population, you've got only, it's hard to maintain impetus when there are such physical barriers in the way of progress. I've kind of said this to you, the barriers to participation, it's the barriers that are the problem, and the barriers are things that we can do something about. What we can do collectively, and this is what I really want to kind of urge people here today to do, is to think collectively and to think in unity, so that together we can access, for example, road and transport infrastructure. It's no good just having one lobbying group down in, Roscommon. It needs to be nationally campaigned. And the organisation of infrastructure, this is a huge impact, where county boundaries prevent interaction between groups or between initiatives, because the funding has to stay on that address there. So say, for example, North Leitrim and West Cavan, which are basically kind of the same place, and then there's a mountain between West Cavan and Cavan. West Cavan can't be doing stuff over here, because that's not its county. And that also happens, obviously, in the border region, where, for example, the Lifford Strabane group had to become the Strabane group and pretend it didn't engage with people from Donegal in order to access its funding. So these are kind of artificial barriers that are being addressed, but not addressed fast enough. I'm just going to, that's some quotes. This presentation can be forwarded to people if you'd like it. I'm leaving that with you. I'm not going to read it to you, because I'm aware how little time I have. The impact is that people just don't get involved. The impact is that people kind of stay home, and that leads to mental health issues, that leads to physical health issues, that leads to drug and alcohol abuse. And positive self-identity is restricted. Like, it's not that people are necessarily less willing to come out in rural areas, but because there isn't a culture of visibility around them, it is a much more kind of solo enterprise sometimes. You don't feel that you have the peer support. And the peer support that you may see should a GCN come floating through the air on the breeze from Dublin is that they're not people like you, really. That's not quite like your life. And I appreciate the GCN, and I'm saying GCN because it's the only, full-on gay publication, has, a kind of column from a rural perspective and stuff. But I have to say to you, it's a column, there's the whole magazine. So I do think that for people, the information that is there on LGBT community in Ireland does not reference rural people, and so they understandably go, well, maybe we might as well just keep quiet. And that means that the voices, the collective voice of us as a community or a population or a demographic, whatever we want to call it, it is not a full range of voices. It is an urban voice in Ireland at the moment, and I would like to see that change. The losses to kind of civic society, something I really found in the work with diversity, was that a lot of civic organisations, set of community forums, were very keen to have LGBT representatives, but they couldn't get LGBT representatives. And that is for two reasons, I would suggest. One is that because people have a fear of visibility in those areas, they are so much less likely to say, yes, I'll stand up as the queer on a community forum in front of my neighbours. Right? And the other reason is that those people who are comfortable, confident, experienced enough to do that, there are a limited number. And the amount of transport that takes, you could be looking at a 150-mile round trip to go to a meeting. And that obviously is preventative. Rural LGBT people are underrepresented both in LGBT media and to a great extent in mainstream media, because what mainstream media goes for is fashion, and there is a fashionable image of LGBT people, which currently focused around, for example, marriage equality or civil partnership campaign. Again, that doesn't take in the kind of older rural man or, you know, the young farming daughter. Do you know, it just doesn't kind of include those people. Speeding briskly through. LGBT diversity, it was a wonderful project and a delight to work for. And in 3 years, an awful lot was achieved in terms of supporting development and promoting good practice. But 3 years is nothing. 3 years is nothing, and now it's done. So the stronger elements or people that came out of that, they will continue, hopefully. But for an awful lot of people, what they felt was that something was kind of put into their hands and now it's gone again. So what we need to bear in mind there is that those people are feeling what's the word I'm looking for? Disaffected, thank you, Alpha. So there's another sector of people that we really need to kind of be drawing in and working with. This, you know, I've kind of said this to you, what I want out of today. Okay, tell you what I want out of today, right? I haven't done these statistics and stuff. You can all go and read a research report, the few that there are on rural isolation. But what I would like you to do is to think about what we could do, to go away from here that we actually all work at what could we do, what could we constructively do. So, you know, within that there are all sorts of things that can be addressed. And I think one of the big issues for rural visibility is about using language, is about actually talking about lesbian, gay, bisexual and transgender issues, and actually not calling it LGBT issues because people don't know what that means, but actually saying the words lesbian, gay, bisexual and transgender. I would like to see research projects focus on rural issues. I would like to see national organisations hold regional conferences. I would like to see national organisations host events outside Dublin. This is not just a rural issue. The range of representation that we need in this country to achieve full equality for lesbian, gay, bisexual and transgender people needs to encompass all the range of voices. And that's voices of all the minority groupings within the LGBT sector as well. We want a strong, cohesive voice. There's a couple of things that I think could be very helpful to get moving, and one of them, you know, there are initiatives underway for this, but is hate crime legislation and the reporting of hate crime, and I do think that would make a major difference in rural Ireland. I'm going to briskly give you 3 examples. I said I would in the thing, so I'm coming up with the goods. 3 examples of effective campaigns done in rural areas. There are a lot more examples that could be done. Do you know, the LGBT Cabin group, which started as a small support group and has actually gone a long way. They access support from Dundalk Outcomes. They're doing cross-border work. They're amazing. I haven't mentioned them here. I'm just telling you about them. Okay, Gay for the Day is it was in 2009. Northwest Pride, in partnership with Eastleigh Family Resource Centre and Gulch Corner, did a Gay for the Day event at the end of Northwest Pride, in which, actually, yes, the whole village of Eastleigh kind of did go gay for the day, and they were all wearing little t-shirts going out gay for the day. There's a bit of a fight because they ran out, you know, like the only gay in the village wasn't wanted, you know. I found, you see this picture of the guard there, I mean, just, you know, I am English, right? You know, the notion of a copper wearing a gay sticker, like, I've come up, oh, is that not illegal? To see that interaction, they were there like making the burgers and stuff, and that was something that was done no cost, to be honest. There wasn't any money, you know, it was no cost, it was just about getting people together. The Out and Proud Roadshow is an annual action done by the Family Resource Centre's Western Region Network, LGBT Network, and in which they, you know, they put together the bus. Look, you see it there. They travel around 2 counties, they go to 15 towns. Northwest Pride made them a couple of CDs at Thorngate Disco, you know, so they're like belting that out as they go down the road. And what they did was they promoted this huge visibility, and the FRCs that were visited have reported, I'm going to say, a marked increase in LGBT inquiries. You know, in some instances they haven't had any before, but a great increase in inquiries. And the final thing I'd like to mention to you, which again, you know, obviously Northwest Pride is dear to be heart, not blowing its own trumpet. These are just, you know, the examples I'm choosing to use here. There's a lot of other work. But the Full Spectrum Project, this is something still in its infancy, but it's a series of discussion forums where issues facing minority groupings within the LGBT community can be addressed. So that has included LGBT asylum seekers, people with disabilities, people with mental health needs. And that's something that I would love to see other agencies, other organisations at national level and in different regions getting involved in as well, and you can contact me about it later. Finally, there are a couple of documents that were made coming out of queries. That's something that can be very easily done in rural areas. You put it together, you write it. Both of those documents are available. If you want them, they can be forwarded to you. I leave you some references. As I said, there isn't a lot of research done in rural Ireland. However, I would like to draw your attention to the Regional Strategy for LGBT Inclusion published last year, which does have some agency focus groups already working on it. So if you're looking for a tool to engage with rural inclusion, then there is a tool. And again, a copy could be emailed to you like that. Thank you very much.